Single dad sheltered a bruised woman at 3 a.m. Her ex-husband's apology letter exposed everything. He opened his door to a trembling stranger at 3 a.m., but when he found the apology letter her ex left behind, he realized he hadn't saved a runaway. He'd stepped straight into a secret so dark it could destroy them both. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The old grandfather clock in Ethan's living room ticked steadily through the night, its familiar rhythm now seeming oddly intrusive in the darkness. At precisely 3:04 a.m., loud banging jolted him from his sleep. His heart raced as the desperate knocking continued. Ethan sat up in bed, his mind still foggy. The house creaked beneath his feet as he made his way down the hallway, checking first on Lily's room. His daughter slept peacefully, her stuffed giraffe tucked under one arm. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. Ethan hurried down the stairs, switching on the porch light. Through the frosted glass panels of his front door, he could make out a shadowy figure. "Who is it?" he called out, his hand hesitating on the doorknob. "Please," came a woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "Please help me." Something in that voice, its raw desperation, made Ethan's protective instincts kick in. He opened the door slowly, ready to face whatever waited on the other side. His breath caught in his throat. There stood Grace Halstead, Lily's substitute teacher from school. But she looked nothing like the composed woman who had praised Lily's artwork at last week's parent-teacher conference. Her dark hair was disheveled, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She clutched a small purse to her chest like a shield. But it was the bruises that made his stomach turn. An angry purple mark bloomed across her left cheekbone. Her lip was split. "Mrs. Halstead?" he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her whole body trembling. "I didn't know where else to go. I remembered you lived out here, from Lily's school records." Her voice cracked, and Ethan saw more bruises on her neck, partially hidden by her collar. "Come in," he said firmly, stepping aside. "Please." Grace stumbled slightly as she entered, and Ethan steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. The old heater hummed steadily, but she was shaking hard enough that her teeth chattered. "Let me get you some water," he said, guiding her to his worn leather armchair near the heating vent. "And a blanket. You're freezing." He hurried to the kitchen, his hands shaking slightly as he filled a glass with water. 4 years of being a widowed father had taught him to stay calm in a crisis, but this situation made his heart ache. He grabbed the soft chenille throw from the back of the couch, the one Sarah had loved so much before she passed. When he returned, Grace hadn't moved. She sat perched on the edge of the chair, her purse still clutched, tight, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Here," he said, keeping his voice low and gentle. He handed her the water first, then carefully draped the blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe here." Grace's hands trembled so badly that water sloshed over the rim of the glass. Ethan steadied it, helping her take a few sips. "I should have left sooner," she whispered, staring into the glass. "I kept thinking he'd change, that if I just tried harder." A tear splashed into the water. Ethan pulled his ottoman closer and sat down, keeping enough distance not to crowd her. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "None of it. I didn't know where to go," she repeated. "The shelters in town were full. I couldn't risk my friends. He knows where they live. But I remembered you lived out here, off the main road." She looked up suddenly, panic in her eyes. "Oh God, Lily, I've put you both in danger." "No," Ethan cut in gently. "You did the right thing coming here. We have good security, and the sheriff's deputy lives just down the road. You're safe." Some of the tension left Grace's shoulders at his words. She pulled the blanket tighter, breathing in its soft warmth. "Would you like me to call someone?" Ethan asked. "The police? Or—" Grace shook her head quickly. "Not yet. Please. I need to think." Her voice was getting slower, exhaustion clearly taking over. Ethan nodded. "Try to rest. We can figure everything out in the morning." He watched as she slowly relaxed into the chair, her death grip on her purse finally loosening. The heater clicked and hummed, providing a steady background noise as Grace's eyes grew heavy. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep, "for not turning me away." "Never," Ethan said quietly. But Grace had already drifted off, her breathing evening out. He sat there in the dim light, watching over her. The bruises looked even worse in the soft glow of the table lamp. Evidence of cruelty he couldn't fathom. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, how she would have handled this situation with such grace and wisdom. He could almost hear her voice. Sometimes God puts people in our path because they need shelter, and we can provide it. The grandfather clock chimed 3:15. Its sound muffled and familiar. Ethan realized with absolute clarity that his peaceful, carefully ordered life had just changed completely. But looking at Grace's battered face, finally relaxed in sleep, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The old kitchen clock showed 5:02 a.m. as Ethan measured coffee grounds into the filter. His movements were careful and quiet, not wanting to wake Grace, who still slept fitfully on the living room couch. The coffee maker gurgled softly as warm amber liquid began dripping into the pot, filling the kitchen with its comforting aroma. Soft footsteps padded down the hallway. Lily appeared in her yellow pajamas decorated with rainbow unicorns. Her brown hair tousled from sleep. She rubbed, her eyes with tiny fists, looking exactly like her mother used to do early in the morning. The similarity made Ethan's heart ache. "Daddy?" she whispered, peering around him toward the living room. "Why is Miss Halstead sleeping on our couch?" Ethan set down the empty coffee tin and knelt to his daughter's level. "She needed some help last night, sweetheart. She didn't have anywhere else to go." Lily's face grew serious as she noticed the bruises on Grace's face, now visible in the dim light from the kitchen. "Someone hurt her," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ethan replied softly, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people need a safe place to rest and heal." Lily's expression brightened suddenly, like the story Mommy used to tell about the injured bird. Remember? She found it in the garden and made it a nest in a shoebox until its wing got better. Ethan smiled, remembering how Sarah had always turned life's harder moments into gentle lessons for their daughter. "That's right, honey. Your mom was very good at helping others. She said we should always help people who are hurting." Lily continued, her voice still quiet but filled with conviction. "Because Jesus said when we help others, we're helping Him too." On the couch, Grace stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion crossing her face before recognition set in. She tried to sit up but winced at the movement. Lily approached the couch carefully, the way she did with stray cats in their yard. "It's okay, Miss Halstead," she said softly. "Daddy helps people. That's what he does." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the little girl. She managed a weak smile before exhaustion overtook her again, her eyes drifting closed. Ethan watched the exchange, his throat tight with emotion. He touched Lily's shoulder gently. "Why don't you go get dressed for school, sweetheart? I'll make you some breakfast in a few minutes." "Can I have pancakes?" Lily asked hopefully. "How about tomorrow?" "We'll stick with cereal this morning." Lily nodded and headed back to her room, pausing to look once more at her sleeping teacher. Ethan could see Grace shivering slightly despite the blanket he'd given her earlier. The old farmhouse got cold in the early morning hours. He approached the couch quietly, knowing the guest room would be more comfortable. With gentle movements, he slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her shoulders. Grace stirred slightly but didn't wake as he lifted her. She was so light in his arms, reminding him painfully of how Sarah had felt near the end of her illness. He pushed the memory away, focusing instead on carrying Grace carefully down the hallway to the guest room. The room was small but neat, with a comfortable bed and handmade quilt Sarah's mother had given them as a wedding gift. Ethan laid Grace down carefully, drawing the quilt over her. In the growing light of dawn, the bruises on her face looked even worse than they had in the darkness. Standing in the doorway, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know exactly what's happening here, but I know you do. Please help me do the right thing." He looked at Grace's sleeping form once more before quietly closing the door. The aroma of coffee drew him back to the kitchen where morning light was beginning to stream through the windows. He could hear Lily humming to herself as she got ready for school, the sound bringing a smile to his face despite his worries. His daughter's simple faith and compassion never failed to amaze him. The coffee pot had finished brewing, and Ethan poured himself a cup, adding a splash of cream. He leaned against the counter, warming his hands around the mug as dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and purples. The morning felt surreal, as if the events of the night might have been a dream, if not for the evidence of Grace's presence in his guest room. From the hallway came the sound of Lily's footsteps as she returned to the kitchen, now dressed for school in her favorite blue sweater and jeans. She climbed onto a kitchen stool and watched as Ethan reached for the cereal box. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "Can we pray for Miss Halstead during morning prayers?" Ethan's heart swelled with love for his daughter. Of course we can, sweetheart. That's a very kind thing to think of. As he poured cereal into Lily's bowl, Ethan glanced toward the hallway where Grace slept. The morning sun was breaking over the horizon now, bringing with it questions and uncertainties. But as he watched his daughter bow her head over her breakfast to pray, he felt a quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the same compassion and faith that Sarah had always shown them. The old farmhouse was quiet except for the gentle hum of the ancient coffee maker. At 5 in the morning, Ethan stood in his small kitchen, watching the dark liquid drip slowly into the pot. His shoulders felt heavy with exhaustion, but sleep wasn't an option anymore. The events of the past 2 hours had left him wide awake, his mind racing with concerns about the woman sleeping fitfully on his living room couch. The soft padding of small feet made him turn. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her long brown hair tousled from sleep, still wearing her favorite pink pajamas with cartoon cats. She rubbed her eyes with tiny fists, looking exactly like her mother used to when waking up early. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice scratchy with sleep. "Why are you up so early?" Before Ethan could answer, Lily wandered into the living room. He followed, coffee forgotten, as his daughter stopped short at the sight of Grace, curled up under the old plaid blanket on their couch. "That's Miss Halstead," Lily said, her eyes growing wide. She turned to look up at her father. "From school. Why is she sleeping here?" Ethan knelt beside his daughter, bringing himself to her eye level. The morning light was just beginning to creep through the windows, casting soft shadows across the room. "Miss Halstead needed some help last night, sweetheart. She didn't have anywhere else to go." Lily's gaze drifted back to her teacher, and Ethan saw the moment she noticed the bruises. His daughter's face changed, showing that particular mix of concern and compassion that always reminded him so much of her mother. "She's hurt," Lily whispered, her small hand reaching for Ethan's larger one. "Like in Mommy's stories about the shelter where she worked?" The question made Ethan's throat tight. Sarah, his late wife, had always tried to explain her volunteer work to Lily in terms their daughter could understand. She would tell stories about helping people who were scared and hurt, making them feel safe again. "Yes, honey," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "Kinda like that." On the couch, Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked disoriented for a moment, fear flickering across her face, until she focused on Ethan and seemed to remember where she was. Then her gaze shifted to Lily, and something in her expression softened. Lily took a small step forward, still holding her father's hand. "Hi, Miss Halstead," she said quietly. "Don't be scared. Daddy helps people." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan noticed how Grace's hands were trembling slightly as she tried to sit up. "You should rest more," he said gently. "The guest room is ready now. It'll be more comfortable than the couch." Grace nodded, clearly exhausted. She attempted to stand but swayed slightly, and Ethan moved quickly to steady her. Without thinking twice, he carefully scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and the realization made his heart ache. "Lily, can you get the door to the guest room?" he asked. His daughter nodded solemnly and hurried ahead, pushing open the door to their small guest bedroom. The morning light was filtering through the lace curtains Sarah had hung years ago, casting delicate patterns on the faded wallpaper. Grace's eyes were already closing again as Ethan laid her gently on the bed. Lily pulled up the quilt, tucking it around her teacher with careful movements that mimicked how Sarah used to tuck her in. They quietly left the room, Ethan pulling the door almost closed but leaving it slightly ajar. Standing in the hallway, he looked up at the ceiling, sending up a silent prayer for guidance. He had always tried to live by Sarah's example of helping others, but this situation felt bigger than anything he'd faced before. Lily tugged at his hand. "Can I make Miss Halstead some toast for when she wakes up?" she whispered. "Mommy always said food helps make people feel better." Ethan smiled down at his daughter, amazed once again by her inherent kindness. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. But first, let's let her sleep for a while." Together, they walked back to the kitchen, as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky in soft pink and gold. The coffee maker had finished its cycle, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma. As Ethan poured himself a cup, he watched Lily carefully counting out bread slices, ready to help in her own way, just as her mother had taught her. Through the kitchen window, he could see the old maple tree in their backyard swaying gently in the morning breeze. Sarah had always said that tree was like their family. Strong roots, sturdy branches, and always room for more people in its shade. As the sun continued to rise, Ethan hoped she had been right about that last part. Morning sunlight crept through the thin cotton curtains of the guest bedroom, casting soft shadows on the faded wallpaper. Grace stirred beneath the quilt, her body aching as consciousness returned. Each movement brought sharp reminders of the previous night's violence. She blinked slowly, taking in unfamiliar surroundings. The old dresser, with its slightly crooked mirror, a wooden rocking chair draped with a handmade afghan, and walls painted a gentle shade of blue, sitting up made her wince. Her ribs protested, and her left cheek felt tender where Thomas had struck her. The events of last night rushed back. The argument, his rage, her desperate drive through dark streets, and finally, the knock on Ethan Caldwell's door. She touched her face gingerly, catching her reflection in the mirror. A purple bruise bloomed along her cheekbone. A gentle knock at the door made her start. "Grace?" Ethan's voice was soft, careful. "I've made breakfast if you're feeling up to it." She cleared her throat. "Thank you. I'll be right out." In the small bathroom across the hall, Grace splashed cold water on her face and tried to make herself presentable. Her clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, but they were all she had. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, the smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air. Ethan stood at the stove, flipping a golden pancake with practiced ease. He wore worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, his graying hair slightly messy. He turned when she entered, his expression gentle but concerned. "Please, sit down. Coffee's fresh." Grace sank into a kitchen chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug he placed before her. "Where's Lily?" "At her friend Sarah's house for their Saturday morning cartoon ritual." He set a plate of pancakes in front of her. "I thought you might want to talk without little ears around." The kindness in his voice almost undid her. Grace stared at her coffee, fighting back tears. "I don't know where to begin." "Take your time." Ethan sat across from her, his own coffee untouched. She took a shaky breath. "Thomas, my ex-husband, he found out where I've been living." The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "The divorce was final 6 months ago, but he won't accept it. He keeps showing up, sending messages. Last night, he was waiting outside my apartment." Ethan listened quietly, his face showing no judgment, only steady concern. He was so angry. Grace's voice trembled. "Said I'd ruined his reputation, that everyone in town believed his lies about me being unstable. When I tried to get past him to my door, he—" She touched her cheek. "I managed to get to my car. I just drove. Your house was the only place I could think of. I remember Lily mentioning you lived out here, away from town." "You did the right thing coming here," Ethan said firmly. "Have you reported him?" Grace gave a bitter laugh. "Thomas has friends in the police department. The last time I tried, they treated it like a minor domestic dispute. Said there wasn't enough evidence." She pushed her pancakes around the plate. "He's been following me. I know it. Little things. Cars parked outside my apartment, hang-up calls, flowers delivered to my classroom with no card." Ethan's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "You can stay here as long as you need to figure out your next steps. It's safer out here, and we have plenty of room. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," he said quietly. "This house has always been a sanctuary for those who need it. My wife." He paused, then continued softly. "Sarah would have wanted that tradition to continue. After breakfast, Grace insisted on helping with the dishes despite Ethan's protests. The simple domesticity of drying plates helped steady her nerves. When they finished, she asked to use the bathroom again. Walking down the hallway, something caught her eye. A framed sketch hung on the wall, a simple pencil drawing of a mother bird sheltering her chicks beneath spread wings during a storm. The style was instantly familiar. She moved closer, her heart beating faster. The bottom corner bore a small mark, not a signature, but a simple symbol she knew well. During the darkest days of her divorce, she'd found comfort in an online art forum, where an anonymous artist posted drawings. Each piece seemed to speak directly to her soul, images of hope, protection, and gentle strength. The artists never revealed their identity, using only that same small symbol to mark their work. Grace stood frozen, staring at the sketch. She'd spent countless nights looking at similar drawings on her phone screen, finding solace in their quiet messages of resilience. Now, here was one of those pieces, hanging in Ethan Caldwell's hallway. Not a print, but the original drawing, the pencil marks fresh and crisp on the paper. She touched the glass, protecting the sketch with trembling fingers. All this time, The anonymous artist, whose work had helped her survive her divorce, had been here in her own community. The quiet handyman who fixed things at the school. The gentle father who'd opened his door to her in the middle of the night. From the kitchen, she heard Ethan moving around, humming softly as he wiped down the counters, completely unaware of the profound impact his art had already had on her life long before this morning. Late morning sun warmed the small kitchen as Ethan knelt beside an open cabinet door, his weathered hands carefully adjusting its loose hinges. The gentle tap of his screwdriver mixed with the soft scratching of Lily's colored pencils against paper at the kitchen table. Grace sat across from Lily, warming her hands around a mug of tea, finding comfort in this peaceful domestic scene. "Need any help?" Grace offered, watching Ethan work. He smiled and shook his head. "Just a quick fix. These old cabinets have seen better days." Lily looked up from her drawing. "Daddy can fix anything. He even fixed Mrs. Peterson's fence when it broke in the storm." "That's right," Ethan said quietly, testing the cabinet door. "Though sometimes things take time to heal properly." He glanced briefly at Grace's bruised arm before returning to his task. Grace's fingers traced the rim of her mug as she gathered her courage. "I noticed the sketch in your hallway earlier," she said softly. "The one of the lighthouse in the storm." Ethan's hands stilled on the screwdriver. "Oh, that old thing?" "It's more than just that old thing," Grace continued. "I'd know that style anywhere. The way the light cuts through the darkness, how hope shines even in the storm." Her voice grew stronger. "You're Hope in Pencil, aren't you? The artist who used to post sketches online?" The screwdriver clattered against the cabinet as Ethan turned to face her fully. "How did you?" "Because I wrote to you," Grace said, her eyes growing misty. 3 years ago, during my divorce, I signed my letters as Searching for Light." Lily stopped coloring, looking between the adults with curious eyes. Ethan sat back on his heels, recognition dawning on his face. "Those letters, they helped me as much as my sketches seemed to help you. I was still struggling with losing Sarah then. I never knew your name," Grace continued, "but your art spoke to me when I felt most alone, the way you captured both struggle and hope." She wiped at her eyes. "Your sketches gave me strength when I had none left. I remember how your words described feeling trapped in darkness," Ethan said quietly. "But you always found something beautiful to share, even on your hardest days. A kind stranger's smile, a bird's song, a child's laughter." Lily moved to her father's side, touching his arm. "Is that why you draw pictures for people, Daddy? To help them feel better?" Ethan pulled his daughter close. "Sometimes people need reminding that light still exists, even when they can't see it themselves." "That's what you did for me," Grace said. Each sketch was like a window letting in sunshine. She smiled softly. "I kept wondering why this house felt familiar when I arrived last night. It wasn't just because I'd seen Lily at school. It was because I recognized the heart behind those drawings in every corner of this home." "The timing of your letters." Ethan shook his head in wonder. "They came right when I needed them most. Lily had just started school, and I was terrified of failing her as a single parent. Your courage in facing your own struggles helped me face mine. I stopped writing when I started teaching again," Grace explained. "And then I met Thomas." Her voice faltered. "And now you're here," Lily said simply, reaching across the table to pat Grace's hand, "where it's safe." Grace squeezed the little girl's fingers gently. "Yes, now I'm here." Ethan stood, brushing dust from his knees. Life has a way of bringing things full circle sometimes. He tested the cabinet door one final time. It swung smoothly on its repaired hinges. "There, good as new." "Thank you," Grace said, and they both knew she meant more than just the cabinet repair. "You should rest," Ethan suggested, noting the fatigue in her eyes. "Dr. Marshall will be here this afternoon to check on you." Grace nodded and stood, carefully. As she gathered her things from the table, her purse tipped over. An unopened envelope slid out, landing face down on the wooden surface. The envelope slid from Grace's purse, landing face up on the worn kitchen table. Ethan noticed it immediately, his eyes drawn to the precise, angular handwriting that addressed it to Grace Halstead. The postmark showed it was from just 2 days ago. Ethan's hand hovered over the envelope. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window caught the crisp white paper, making the dark ink stand out even more starkly. His conscience wrestled with the decision. The letter wasn't his to open, but after everything that had happened, anything from Thomas Halstead felt dangerous. "Grace?" he called softly down the hallway. There's something you should see." Grace appeared in the doorway, her borrowed sweater hanging loosely on her frame. The bruise on her cheek had darkened, but her eyes were clearer after a few hours of rest. She froze when she saw the envelope in Ethan's hand. "It fell from your purse," he explained, holding it out to her. "I noticed the handwriting." Grace's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. "It's from Thomas," she whispered, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. "I grabbed my mail when I left, but I hadn't opened everything." She stared at it like it might bite her. Lily looked up from her coloring book at the table, sensing the tension. Ethan gently touched her shoulder. "Sweetie, why don't you go pick out a book from your room? We can read together in a little while." Once Lily had padded away, Ethan sat across from Grace. "You don't have to open it if you don't want to," he said quietly. "Or if you'd rather read it alone." Grace shook her head. "No, I think I need you here." Her thumb broke the seal, and she pulled out a single sheet of expensive stationery. Thomas's precise handwriting filled the page. As she read, the color drained from her face. Her hands began to shake so badly that the paper rattled. Ethan resisted the urge to reach for it, letting her finish on her own terms. Grace's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "He apologizes, says he's sorry for everything, the controlling behavior, the manipulation, the threats." She gave a bitter laugh that held no humor. "He actually sounds sincere. That's what he does, you know? He can sound so reasonable, so contrite, when he wants to." Ethan nodded, keeping his expression neutral but encouraging. He'd seen this pattern before in others who'd escaped abuse, the manipulation that could make victims doubt their own experiences. Grace's fingers clenched around the paper, crumpling its edges. But the last line. She pushed the letter across the table to Ethan, her hand shaking. Ethan read the final sentence and his chest tightened. "I'm sorry for what I will have to do next. He planned this," Grace whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Before I even ran last night, he wrote this. He knew something would happen." Her voice rose with panic. "What does he mean? What is he going to do?" Ethan stood and moved to her side of the table, pulling out the chair next to her. "Grace, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You're safe here. Whatever he planned, whatever he thought would happen, you got away. You're not alone anymore." A sob broke from her throat, and she pressed her hands to her face. Ethan hesitated, then gently placed his hand on her shoulder, offering quiet support as she cried. "I thought I was finally free," she managed between sobs. "When I got away last night, I thought maybe this time." She drew in a shuddering breath. "But he's always one step ahead. He's always planning something." "Then we'll plan too," Ethan said firmly. "First step is calling Sheriff Daniels. This letter, combined with what happened last night, it's evidence, Grace. Evidence of premeditation, of threats." Grace lowered her hands, revealing tear-streaked cheeks. "Sheriff Daniels? But Thomas has connections everywhere. He's friends with half the town council." "Daniels is different," Ethan assured her. "He's been watching Thomas for years, trying to build a case. He just needed someone brave enough to come forward." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Someone like you." Fresh tears welled in Grace's eyes, but these seemed different. Tears of relief, of being believed. "I never thought I'd be brave," she whispered. "I spent so long being afraid. Coming here took courage," Ethan said softly. "Surviving took courage. And now you're not facing him alone anymore." Grace nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her borrowed sweater. She looked down at the letter again, and her shoulders tensed. "What do you think he meant? What he will have to do?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But that's exactly why we need to talk to Daniels." He stood up slowly. "I'm going to call him now. Would you like some tea while we wait?" Grace managed a weak smile. "Yes, please. And thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then picked up his phone. As he dialed the sheriff's number, he watched Grace sitting at his kitchen table, her shoulders curved inward protectively, her fingers still trembling as they smoothed the crumpled letter. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and for a moment he saw not just her fear, but her strength, the courage it had taken to break free, to trust again, to face whatever came next. Grace wrapped her hands around the empty mug Ethan had set before her, seeking its warmth as she waited for the kettle to boil. She stared at the letter on the table, Thomas's threats, seeming to leap off the page in his perfect handwriting. The sound of Ethan's voice speaking quietly to Sheriff Daniels drifted over, and she closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the feeling of safety she'd found in the Sibin, humble farmhouse, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her again. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ethan's front porch as he sat in the old wooden rocking chair, waiting. His fingers drummed anxiously against the armrest while his eyes stayed fixed on the gravel driveway. Inside, he could hear the muffled sounds of Lily showing Grace her collection of stuffed animals, a small moment of peace before whatever storm was coming. The familiar rumble of Sheriff Daniels' patrol car broke the quiet. Ethan stood as the vehicle pulled up, dust settling around its wheels. The sheriff stepped out, his normally easygoing expression replaced with something more serious. He adjusted his belt as he walked up the creaking porch steps. "Afternoon, Ethan," Sheriff Daniels said, keeping his voice low. He glanced at the front window before continuing. "Mind if we talk out here?" "Of course." Ethan gestured to the second rocking chair. "Can I get you some water?" "No, thank you." The sheriff settled into the chair with a heavy sigh. "We've got a situation developing that you need to know about." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Thomas?" "He came into the station about an hour ago." Sheriff Daniels removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Filed a missing persons report on Grace." "But that's not the worst of it." "What do you mean?" "He's claiming she's mentally unstable, says she's been having episodes, imagining things. According to him, she needs psychiatric help and he's deeply concerned for her safety." The sheriff's tone made it clear what he thought of that story. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "That's ridiculous. You've seen her bruises. She's terrified of him." "I know, Ethan. I've had my suspicions about Thomas Halstead for years, but he's careful. Never leaves evidence we can use." Sheriff Daniels leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "He's got connections all over town. Bank board, city council, chamber of commerce, people listen when he talks." "So he's trying to discredit her," Ethan said, the realization settling like ice in his chest. "Make it look like she's unstable so no one believes her if she speaks up about the abuse. Classic manipulation tactic. And, unfortunately, it often works." The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Most folks in town only see Thomas as public face, successful businessman, community leader. They don't see what happens behind closed doors." Through the window, Ethan caught a glimpse of Lily showing Grace how to make her stuffed giraffe dance. The simple innocence of the moment made his heart ache. "What are my options here?" Ethan asked. "Legally, I can't force Grace to leave. She's an adult who came here willingly, and there's no court order preventing her from staying." Sheriff Daniels put his hat back on, adjusting the brim. "But you need to understand what you're getting into. Thomas won't let this go easily. He'll use every bit of influence he has to make things difficult for both of you." Ethan nodded slowly, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Just be careful, Ethan. Document everything. If Grace has any evidence of the abuse, photos, texts, emails, make copies. And if Thomas shows up here." The sheriff stood, his hand resting instinctively on his badge. "Call you immediately," Ethan finished. "Day or night." Sheriff Daniels stepped down from the porch. "And Ethan, you're doing the right thing. Just watch your back." Ethan stayed on the porch until the patrol car disappeared around the bend, dust settling in its wake. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the vine that climbed the porch trellis. It reminded him of quieter days, before this morning had changed everything. When he finally went back inside, the house was oddly silent. Lily's stuffed animals sat abandoned on the living room floor. He found his daughter in the kitchen, carefully drawing with her colored pencils. "Where's Grace?" he asked softly. Lily pointed toward the guest room. "She said she needed a minute alone. She looks sad, Daddy." Ethan's heart sank as he approached the guest room. The door was partially open, and through the gap, he could see Grace sitting on the edge of the bed. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Grace?" She quickly wiped her eyes, though it did little to hide the evidence of her tears. "I'm sorry. I heard the sheriff's car. I know Thomas must be looking for me. I'll start packing." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Ethan intended. He softened his tone. "No, you don't need to pack anything. But Thomas, he'll make trouble for you. For Lily." Fresh tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "I can't let that happen. Not after everything you've done for me." Ethan crossed the room slowly, giving Grace time to object if she wanted space. When she didn't, he sat down beside her on the bed, careful to leave some distance between them. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "What Thomas is doing, trying to paint you as unstable, trying to isolate you, that's exactly why you can't leave. It's what he wants. He's counting on you feeling guilty enough to go back." Grace's hands twisted in her lap. "But he's powerful. He knows everyone in town. He'll find a way to hurt you." "Let him try." Ethan surprised himself with the steel in his voice. "I promised you could stay until you figure out your next steps, and I meant it. I won't send you away." A sob caught in Grace's throat. "Why? Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know?" Ethan thought about the letters she had written to his anonymous art account years ago. Letters full of pain and hope and quiet courage. He thought about how his daughter had immediately trusted her, and how Grace had responded with such genuine warmth despite her own fear. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one should have to face someone like Thomas alone." Grace's crying softened to quiet sniffles. Outside, the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft purples and deep blues. Another day ending, another beginning, just around the corner. Whatever Thomas had planned, whatever storms were coming, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice in offering Grace shelter. The sound of Lily's footsteps in the hallway drew their attention. She appeared in the doorway, holding one of her favorite stuffed animals, a well-loved rabbit with floppy ears. "Mr. Hoppy helps me when I'm sad," she said, offering the rabbit to Grace. "He's really good at hugs." The kitchen filled with the warm aroma of baked chicken and herbs as Grace reached for the plates in the upper cabinet. Her movements were careful, still mindful of her bruises, but there was a gentle rhythm to how she and Lily moved around each other, setting the table. "The blue plates are my favorite," Lily said, carefully placing forks beside each setting. "Mom picked them out special from that store downtown before it closed." Grace's hand trembled slightly as she set down the last plate. "They're beautiful, Lily, like little pieces of sky." From the doorway, Ethan watched them, his heart heavy with competing emotions. The sight was both warming and worrying. Lily hadn't shown this much enthusiasm since before her mother passed, but the reality of their situation weighed on him like a physical burden. Just that afternoon, he'd received a text from Martha at the church office where he worked as a handyman. "People are talking," she'd written. "The board wants to meet Monday morning." He'd deleted the message, but couldn't delete the knot in his stomach. "Can I pour the water, Dad?" Lily asked, breaking into his thoughts. "Sure, sweetheart. Just be careful with the pitcher." He moved to help her, steadying her small hands around the glass container. Grace wiped her palms on her borrowed sweatpants, ones that had belonged to Lily's mother. "I could leave," she said quietly, reading the worry in Ethan's face. "I don't want to cause trouble for your family." "No!" Lily protested, setting down the pitcher with a thud that made water slosh onto the tablecloth. "You can't go. You're safe here with us." Ethan grabbed a dish towel to mop up the spill. "Lily's right about one thing. You are safe here." He met Grace's eyes. "The rest we'll figure out." But as they sat down to eat, the questions tumbled through his mind. What would the church board say about an unmarried woman staying in his home? Would Thomas's influence reach the child services worker who checked on Lily every few months? The custody arrangement after Sarah's death had been tentative at best. Grace barely touched her food, pushing chicken around her plate. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door." "You didn't bring anything," Ethan said, firmly. "Thomas did this, not you." Lily reached over and patted Grace's hand. "Daddy says bad things aren't our fault just because they happen to us. Like when Mom got sick. It wasn't anybody's fault." Grace's eyes welled with tears, and she quickly dabbed at them with her napkin. "Your daddy sounds very wise." "He is," Lily declared, "and he makes good chicken too." A small laugh escaped Grace, though it caught on a sob. Ethan watched her struggle to compose herself, saw the shame that colored her cheeks. It was the same look she'd worn when she first arrived, that mixture of desperation and self-blame that made his heart ache. "When Sarah was sick," Ethan said slowly, "people told me to send Lily to stay with her grandparents. Said a man couldn't raise a daughter alone." He cut another piece of chicken. "Sometimes doing the right thing means people won't understand, but that doesn't make it wrong." Grace looked up, really looked at him for the first time since sitting down. The bruise on her cheekbone had deepened to purple, but there was something stronger in her eyes now. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Grace her homework, proudly displaying her math problems. Grace slipped easily into teacher mode, praising Lily's neat handwriting and careful calculations. Watching them, Ethan felt both certainty and fear. He was doing the right thing. He knew it in his bones, but the cost might be higher than he'd imagined. When bedtime came, Lily hugged Grace carefully before heading upstairs. "Good night," she said. "I'm glad you're here." Grace stood frozen for a moment after Lily left, then turned away quickly, shoulders shaking. Ethan pretended not to notice her tears as he gathered the last dishes from the table. "I'll do those," Grace offered, her voice rough. "You rest," Ethan said. "Doctor's orders, remember?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as she headed toward the guest room. Ethan watched her go, noting how she still walked like someone expecting to be struck. It strengthened his resolve, despite his fears. Upstairs, Lily was already in her pajamas, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her favorite stuffed elephant. "Did Mom send Grace to us?" she asked as Ethan sat beside her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Well, Mom always said to help people who are hurt, and Grace needed help. So maybe Mom made sure she found us." Ethan's throat tightened. "Maybe she did, Lilybug. Your mom was pretty smart that way." He tucked the covers around her. "Say your prayers?" Lily nodded. "I asked God to make Grace's hurts better, and to keep Daddy's job safe." His heart clenched. Of course she'd picked up on his worry about work. "God knows what we need," he said, kissing her forehead. "Sleep tight, sweetheart." After turning on her nightlight, Ethan moved to the window to draw the curtains. A flash of movement caught his eye, headlights in the distance. A car sat idling at the end of their long driveway, just visible in the gathering darkness. As he watched, the vehicle pulled away slowly, its taillights disappearing around the bend. The old floorboards creaked under Ethan's feet as he made his way down the hallway in the dim light of dawn. He paused outside the guest room, listening. The soft sound of breathing from within eased the knot of worry in his chest. Grace was still there, still safe. He headed to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, its gentle gurgling a familiar comfort. Through the window, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky in pale pinks and oranges. His mind wandered to the car he'd seen last night, wondering if it had been Thomas or just his imagination working overtime. The sound of sock-covered feet padding down the hallway made him turn. Grace stood in the doorway, her hair slightly tousled from sleep, but her eyes clearer than they'd been yesterday. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind, but I thought I might make breakfast as a small way to thank you." "You don't need to," Ethan started, but Grace was already moving toward the refrigerator. "Please, cooking. It helps me feel normal." She pulled out eggs and milk. "Do you have flour?" "I make pretty good pancakes." Before Ethan could answer, Lily appeared, her face brightening at the sight of Grace. "Pancakes? Really?" Grace smiled, and for a moment the shadows in her eyes lifted. "Would you like to help? I always need a good assistant chef." Soon the kitchen filled with warm, sweet scents and the sound of Lily's cheerful chatter as she helped Grace measure ingredients. Ethan watched them work together, noticed how naturally Grace explained each step to his daughter, her teacher's patience showing through. "Miss Halstead," Lily said, carefully stirring the batter, "will you be coming back to teach our class soon? Tommy misses your special reading time." Grace's hand stilled over the griddle. I'm not sure yet, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to take breaks to figure things out. Like when Daddy took a break after Mommy went to heaven?" The question hung in the air. Ethan moved to intervene, but Grace knelt down to Lily's level, her voice gentle. "Something like that. Sometimes people need safe places to heal. Your daddy's very kind to give me one." The moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of Ethan's phone. The caller ID showed Robert Chin, church board. Ethan's stomach tightened as he answered. "Morning, Robert." "Ethan." Robert's usually friendly voice held an edge. "There's been some talk." "About a woman staying at your house?" Ethan moved to the living room, lowering his voice. "Yes, a friend needed help. It's temporary." "A friend?" Robert's tone grew more pointed. "Some people are concerned about appearances. A single man with a young daughter. She's in trouble, Robert, real trouble. Would you rather I turned her away?" "Of course not, but—" Robert paused. "There are rumors." "About her, Ethan. Her ex-husband is saying things. The church board is worried about liability. She's a substitute teacher at Lily's school. A good person who needs help." Ethan tried to keep the frustration from his voice. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Help people? Just be careful, Ethan. Think about Lily. The call ended, leaving Ethan with a heavy weight in his chest. When he returned to the kitchen, Grace was placing a stack of golden pancakes on the table, but her shoulders were tense. I heard, she said quietly. I should go. I'm causing too much trouble. No, Ethan said firmly. You're not going anywhere until we know you're safe. Grace's eyes filled with tears. But your job, your reputation, are not as important as your life. Ethan pulled out a chair for her. Now sit down and eat these pancakes you made before they get cold. Lily looked between them, then reached for Grace's hand. Please stay. Your pancakes are even better than Daddy's. A small laugh escaped Grace, though tears still threatened. That's not saying much, is it? Hey now, Ethan protested, but he was smiling too. They ate together, and for a few moments, it felt almost normal. But Ethan couldn't shake Robert's words or the way Grace's eyes kept darting to the windows. She was right to be worried. Thomas was still out there, probably searching. After breakfast, while Grace helped Lily with her reading, Ethan stepped out onto the front porch to check the property. The morning dew still clung to the grass, making everything glisten in the early light. He was about to turn back inside when something caught his eye. There in the soft earth near his driveway were fresh tire tracks. They weren't from his truck. The treads were different, newer. Someone had been here watching his house. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Ethan guided his old pickup truck backward. Lily sat beside him, her backpack clutched tight against her chest, her eyes darting to the house where Grace remained hidden inside. Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? Ethan asked gently, turning onto the main road. Lily nodded, her pigtails bobbing. If anyone asks about Miss Halstead, I just say, I don't know anything. She frowned slightly. But I don't like pretending. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I know, honey. Sometimes keeping someone safe means being extra careful with our words. The drive to school was quiet, with Lily humming softly to the radio while Ethan's mind wandered to Grace, alone in their house. The morning traffic moved slowly through their small town, past the hardware store where he bought his supplies, and the little diner where he and Lily sometimes had Saturday breakfast. When they pulled into the school parking lot, Ethan noticed the usual cluster of parents by the entrance. Something felt different today, the way conversation stopped as he walked past. How eyes followed him and Lily. Mrs. Peterson, whose son was in Lily's class, touched his arm as he passed. Ethan, she said quietly, glancing around, I thought you should know. That businessman, Mr. Halstead, he was here yesterday afternoon asking questions about his wife. Ethan's stomach clenched, but he kept his face neutral. Thanks for letting me know, Sarah. He seemed intense, she added, lowering her voice further. Be careful, okay? Ethan nodded, guiding Lily toward her classroom. More whispers followed them down the hallway. He could feel the weight of judgment, of curiosity, of speculation pressing in from all sides. Have a good day, sweetie, he said, kneeling to hug Lily. I love you. Love you too, Daddy. She squeezed him extra tight before disappearing into her classroom. The drive home felt longer, heavier with worry. Thomas had been at the school. He was getting closer, asking questions, probably building his case. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind raced with possibilities, with dangers, with prayers for guidance. When he pulled up to the house, he found Grace in the kitchen. She stood at the sink, soap suds up to her elbows, scrubbing at a baking dish. 3 more clean pans sat in the drying rack. Grace, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. You don't need to do that. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I want to help somehow. You've given up so much to keep me safe. The dishes are the least I can do. The morning light caught the fading bruise on her cheek, and Ethan's heart ached. Let's sit for a minute, he suggested, pulling out a kitchen chair. Grace dried her hands and sat across from him, her shoulders tense. Something happened at school, didn't it? Thomas was there yesterday, Ethan said quietly, asking questions. Grace's face palled, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Oh, God. The children. What if he... The school has strict policies about who can pick up students, Ethan assured her. Lily's teacher knows to only release her to me. Grace nodded, but her hands were trembling. I'm putting your whole family at risk. Maybe I should... Don't. Ethan cut in, his voice gentle but firm. Don't say you should leave. We've been through this. But your reputation, your job at the church. Grace. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. Do you remember those letters you wrote about finding hope in dark places? She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. You wrote about having faith that good people still exist. That kindness matters more than appearances, he smiled softly. I believed that when I drew those sketches, and I believe it now. We'll figure this out together. I'm scared, Grace whispered, not just for me anymore, for you and Lily. I know, but fear doesn't get to win, not this time. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How do you stay so steady? So sure? I'm not always sure, Ethan admitted. But I know what's right, and keeping you safe is right. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning sun warming the kitchen. Grace finally stood, reaching for the dish towel again. At least let me finish the dishes. It helps, having something normal to do. Ethan nodded, understanding her need for routine, for purpose. He was about to respond when a loud bang echoed from outside, a delivery truck backfiring as it passed the house. Grace dropped to the floor instantly, her arms covering her head, a small cry escaping her lips. Her whole body shook as memories of violence crashed over her. Ethan moved quickly but carefully, pulling out a chair. You're safe, he said softly. It was just a truck. You're safe here. Grace managed to stand on shaking legs and collapsed into the chair, her breath coming in short gasps. The dish towel lay forgotten on the floor, a reminder of how quickly peace could shatter. The aroma of simmering beef stew filled the small kitchen as evening settled over the farmhouse. Grace stirred the pot while Ethan helped Lily with her math homework at the wooden table. The familiar scratch of pencil on paper mixed with the gentle bubbling of the stew, creating an almost normal domestic scene. And then you carry the one? Lily asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. That's right, sweetheart, Ethan pointed to her worksheet. Just like that. Grace watched them from her place by the stove, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish marks, but the fear inside her remained sharp and present. Dinner's ready, she announced softly, ladling the thick stew into 3 bowls. It smells amazing, Lily said, carefully putting away her homework. Like the stew Daddy makes, but better. Ethan chuckled. I think you're right about that. They had just settled into their meal when headlights swept across the kitchen window. Ethan tensed, rising slightly from his chair, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Daniel's patrol car. Lily, why don't you take your dinner to the living room and work on that book report? Ethan suggested, his voice carefully casual. Lily looked between the adults, understanding in her young eyes. Okay, Daddy. She gathered her bowl and spoon, giving Grace's hand a quick squeeze as she passed. The knock at the door was quiet but firm. Ethan opened it to find Sheriff Daniels on the porch, his expression grave in the porch light. Evening, Ethan. Miss Halstead. The sheriff stepped inside, removing his hat. Sorry to interrupt your dinner. Would you like some stew? Grace offered, but the sheriff shook his head. No, thank you. This isn't a social call. He settled into the chair Ethan offered, glancing toward the living room where Lily sat. I've got some information you both need to hear. Ethan and Grace exchanged looks across the table. Under the table, Grace's hands twisted in her lap. Thomas Halstead, Sheriff Daniels began, keeping his voice low, is under federal investigation, has been for months, apparently. Financial crimes, the kind that carry serious prison time. Grace's spoon clattered against her bowl. What? The feds have been building a case. Wire fraud, money laundering, some complicated scheme involving his investment firm. The sheriff leaned forward. But they've been having trouble getting solid evidence. Seems Mr. Halstead is very careful about his paper trail. Ethan watched Grace's face carefully. How does this affect Grace's situation? That's complicated. Sheriff Daniels sighed. On one hand, your presence here, Miss Halstead, could be seen as interfering with an ongoing federal investigation. On the other hand, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You might have information that could help their case. I don't know anything about Thomas's business, Grace protested. He never discussed work with me, but you lived in that house. Maybe saw papers, overheard conversations, and there's the matter of the domestic violence, pattern of control, intimidation. It could establish character. Grace's face had gone pale. They'd want me to testify. Eventually, yes. But right now, they don't even know you're here. I haven't reported it yet. The sheriff held up a hand as both Ethan and Grace started to speak. I'm not required to, not immediately. Domestic situations get some leeway, especially when there's credible threat to the victim. Ethan's voice was steady. What are our options? Several. None of them perfect. Sheriff Daniels counted them off on his fingers. 1. Grace goes to the feds now, enters witness protection. 2. She stays here while we gather more evidence of Thomas's threats, building our own case. 3. She leaves town entirely, starts fresh somewhere else. Witness protection? Grace whispered, her hands shaking so badly that Ethan reached across the table to steady them. It would mean leaving everything behind, the sheriff confirmed. New identity, new location, but you'd have federal protection. And the other options? Ethan asked, his hands still covering Grace's. Staying here is risky. Thomas has influence in town, and he's already spreading stories. But if we can document his harassment, prove he's still a threat. Sheriff Daniels shook his head. It could help both cases, the abuse charges and the federal investigation. And just running? Grace's voice was barely audible. Hardest to pull off, least protection. But you'd be off everyone's radar, including the feds. The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant sound of Lily turning pages in the living room. The stew grew cold in their bowls as the weight of these choices settled over them. How long do we have to decide? Ethan finally asked. Not long. A few days at most. The feds are closing in, and Thomas is getting more aggressive with his search. The sheriff stood, replacing his hat. I'll keep watching the house, but you need to be careful. Both of you. Ethan walked him to the door while Grace sat frozen at the table, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Through the window, she could see Lily curled up with her book, innocent and unaware of how complicated her life had become because of Grace's presence. After showing the sheriff out, Ethan returned to find Grace gone from the table. He found her on the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself in the cool evening air. I'm ruining your life, she whispered, not turning around. Yours and Lily's. All because I was too afraid to leave Thomas sooner, too blind to see what he really was. The porch boards creaked as Ethan stepped closer, but he didn't touch her. He knew she needed space to voice her fears. Everything you've built here, your reputation, your job at the church, this safe home for Lily? Grace's voice broke. I'm destroying it all just by being here. The screen door creaked softly as Ethan stepped onto the back porch, carefully balancing 2 steaming mugs of apple cider. The autumn night was crisp, but not cold, with stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. Grace sat wrapped in an old quilt on the wooden bench, her face turned toward the distant tree line. Thought you might like something warm, Ethan said quietly, offering her one of the mugs. Grace's fingers curled around the ceramic, drawing comfort from its warmth. Thank you, she whispered. The sweet, spicy scent of cinnamon and apples drifted up with the steam. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The porch light cast a soft golden glow around them, creating a peaceful bubble in the darkness. My wife Sarah used to love nights like this, Ethan said softly, his voice holding both warmth and old pain. She'd drag out every blanket in the house, and we'd stay up counting stars until Lily fell asleep. Grace turned to look at him, seeing the mix of love and loss in his eyes. How long has it been? 6 years this December? Ethan took a slow sip of cider. Cancer. It happened so fast we barely had time to say goodbye. Lily was only 4. I'm so sorry. Grace's voice was gentle. She sounds like she was wonderful. A small smile tugged at Ethan's lips. She was. Full of life and kindness. She's the one who taught me to draw, actually. Said everyone needed a way to let their feelings out. The drawings, Grace said softly. They helped me more than you know. During the worst days of my marriage, finding those sketches online, they gave me hope. Like someone understood. I never knew who was writing those letters, Ethan admitted. But they kept me going too. Knowing the art was helping someone else. It made me feel like I was honoring Sarah somehow. The screen door squeaked again, and they turned to see Lily padding out in her pajamas, dragging her favorite fuzzy blanket. Can't sleep? Ethan asked. Lily shook her head, her hair still, damp from her bath. I heard you talking. She looked at Grace, hopefully. Can I sit with you? Grace opened her arms and the quilt, making space beside her. Of course, sweetheart. Lily snuggled in between them, pulling her blanket up to her chin. Did Daddy tell you about Mama's special hot chocolate? She put tiny marshmallows and shapes on top. She sounds magical, Grace said, smiling as Lily leaned against her shoulder. She was. Lily's voice was sleepy. But you're kind of magical too. You make Daddy smile more. Grace's breath caught, and she met Ethan's eyes over Lily's head. His expression was soft, vulnerable. You know, Grace said carefully, I lost my mom when I was young too. But she taught me something important first, that love isn't like a cup that gets empty. It's like a garden that keeps growing. Lily nodded sagely, though her eyes were drooping. That's pretty, like Daddy's drawings. They fell into another comfortable silence, broken only by Lily's breathing, growing deeper and more even. Grace found herself absently stroking the child's hair, the way her own mother used to do for her. I never thought I'd feel safe again, Grace whispered, not wanting to wake Lily. After Thomas, I forgot what it was like to just be still, to not be afraid. Ethan's voice was equally quiet. When Sarah died, I thought that was it, that Lily and I would just exist, survive. I didn't expect to find room in my heart for her. He trailed off, but his meaning hung in the air between them. Grace felt tears well up in her eyes, but for the first time in years, they weren't from pain or fear. They were from something lighter, something that felt like possibility. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for taking me in that night, but for showing me what kindness looks like, what family could feel like. Ethan reached across Lily's sleeping form and squeezed Grace's hand gently. The touch was brief, but filled with understanding. A shooting star streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of silver light. Grace closed her eyes and made a wish. Not for escape or survival this time, but for the courage to keep her heart open to whatever this fragile, beautiful thing was becoming. When she opened them again, she was smiling through her tears. The night air felt clean in her lungs, and the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter. Lily's warm weight against her side anchored her to this moment, this feeling of belonging she'd thought was lost forever. For the first time since she could remember, Grace felt hope unfurling in her chest like a flower reaching for the sun. Whatever came next, she wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The morning sun filtered through wisps of fog as Ethan loaded his toolbox into his old pickup truck. The metal handle was cool against his palm, familiar and grounding. Grace stood in the doorway, wrapped in one of his late wife's cardigans, her bruises, now fading to yellowish marks. Are you sure you'll be okay? Ethan asked, glancing between Grace and Lily, who was sitting at the kitchen table working on a drawing. We'll be fine, Grace assured him with a small smile. Lily's going to help me make cookies, right? Lily bounced in her chair. Chocolate chip, and Grace said I could lick the spoon. Ethan couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. The past few days had brought an unexpected warmth to their home, despite the circumstances. I shouldn't be more than a couple hours. The railing just needs some reinforcement. The drive to church was peaceful, the country roads quiet in the morning light. Ethan pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, noting only Pastor Mike's car and a few others he didn't recognize. The broken railing along the side entrance needed attention before Sunday services. He was measuring the damaged section when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black sedan pulled up, its engine purring to a stop. Ethan's stomach tightened as Thomas Halstead stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place for a Thursday morning. Mr. Caldwell. Thomas's voice carried across the parking lot, smooth as polished marble but just as cold. What a fortunate coincidence. Ethan straightened slowly, keeping his grip loose on the measuring tape. Mr. Halstead. Thomas approached with measured steps, his shoes clicking against the pavement. I've been hoping to speak with you about my wife. Ex-wife. Ethan corrected quietly, noting how several church members had emerged from their cars, watching the exchange. A temporary situation, Thomas said with a tight smile. Grace is unwell. She's been struggling with reality lately, making up stories, seeing threats where none exist. His voice carried just enough concern to sound genuine to those gathering around them. Ethan's jaw clenched. I think you should leave. Not until you tell me where she is. Thomas's facade cracked slightly. She needs help, professional help. You're only enabling her delusions by hiding her. More cars were arriving now, the women's prayer group meeting, Ethan realized. They clustered in small groups, whispering behind raised hands. Grace knows her own mind, Ethan said firmly, and her own heart. Thomas's face darkened. Does she? Or has she spun you some tragic tale, played the victim? His voice rose, ensuring everyone could hear. Did she tell you about the time she disappeared for days? About her paranoid accusations? The way she turned on our friends, claimed they were all part of some conspiracy? Ethan saw Mrs. Peterson, the head of the church board, watching with worried eyes. Pastor Mike stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. "You're twisting things," Ethan said, but Thomas pressed on. "I've tried to get her help, real medical help, but she runs away, finds someone new to manipulate with her stories." Thomas turned to address the growing crowd directly. "I'm worried sick about her. She needs medication, supervision. Instead, she's being harbored by," he gestured at Ethan with calculated disdain. "A single man, living alone with his young daughter." The whispers grew louder. Ethan felt the weight of judgment pressing in from all sides. "That's enough," he said, but his voice was drowned out as Thomas continued. "What kind of man takes in another man's wife, keeps her hidden away? What example is that setting?" Thomas's voice cracked with manufactured emotion. "I just want to help her, to get her the care she needs before she hurts herself or someone else." "Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her face pinched with concern. "Ethan, is this true? Do you have this woman in your home? With Lily?" "It's not what you think," Ethan started, but Thomas cut him off. "Not what we think? Then why hide her? Why not let her face me, face everyone, if she has nothing to hide?" Thomas's voice rose to a shout. "Where is my wife?" "Caldwell?" "Ex-wife," Ethan repeated firmly, though his heart pounded. "And she's safe. That's what matters." "Safe?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Safe from what? From getting the help she desperately needs?" Mrs. Peterson touched Ethan's arm. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." Her voice was gentle but firm. "The board needs to address this situation." The meeting that followed was brief but devastating. Though Pastor Mike tried to mediate, the board's concerns about appearances and propriety overwhelmed any defense Ethan could offer without betraying Grace's confidence. "Until this situation is resolved," Mrs. Peterson said carefully, "we think it's best if you step back from your duties here. We can't have this kind of controversy affecting the congregation." Ethan nodded numbly, knowing any argument would only make things worse. As he walked to his truck, he could hear Thomas speaking softly to small groups, his words dripping with concern and insinuation. The damage was done. The drive home felt longer than usual. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind raced with worry. They'd need money now. The church work had been his main income. But more than that, he worried about how quickly Thomas had managed to turn people against him, against Grace. When he pulled into his driveway, the smell of fresh cookies wafted from the open kitchen window. He could hear Lily laughing inside, and for a moment, his heart lifted. But as he opened the front door, Grace turned from the sink where she was washing dishes. Her smile faded instantly as she saw his face. "Ethan?" she asked softly, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What happened?" He met her concerned gaze, seeing not the unstable woman Thomas had described, but someone strong enough to flee abuse, someone kind enough to make cookies with his daughter, someone brave enough to trust again despite everything she'd been through. The worry in her eyes deepened as she waited for his answer. "Ethan's?" Hands trembled slightly as he set 2 mugs of coffee on the kitchen table. Through the doorway, he could see Lily sprawled on her stomach in the living room, surrounded by colored paper and glue sticks for her science project. The familiar sight of his daughter at work steadied him as he prepared to tell Grace about what had happened at the church. Grace sat across from him, her fingers curled around the warm mug. The morning light caught the fading bruises on her face, now tinged yellow and green. Her eyes, sharp and observant, hadn't left his face since he'd walked through the door. "Something happened at the church," Ethan said quietly, keeping his voice low so Lily wouldn't hear. "Thomas was there." Grace's fingers tightened around the mug. "What did he do?" Ethan took a deep breath. "He made a scene, called you unstable, accused me of hiding you." He paused, watching concern flood her features. "The church board, they've suspended me. Until this situation is resolved," they said. Grace set down her mug so quickly that coffee sloshed onto the table. "No," she whispered, her face draining of color. "No, no, no. Your job. It's just temporary." Ethan tried to reassure her, but Grace was already shaking her head. "This is exactly what he does," she said, her voice cracking. "He destroys things, people's lives, their reputations, their work." She pressed her hands against her face. "And now he's doing it to you." From the living room came the sound of Lily humming as she worked on her project. the peaceful noise a stark contrast to the tension in the kitchen. "Grace, look at me," Ethan said gently. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were wet. "I knew what I was risking when I let you stay. This was my choice, but it's not right," Grace insisted. "You're losing your income. You're standing in the church. All because you helped me." She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. I won't." "Grace? Daddy?" Lily called from the living room. "Can you help me with this part?" "Coming, sweetheart," Ethan answered, then turned back to Grace. "We'll figure this out. I have some savings, and there's other work I can do." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and lost in the borrowed cardigan. "You don't understand. Thomas won't stop. He'll keep pushing until he's taken everything from you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Just like he did to me." Throughout the day, Grace grew quieter and more withdrawn. She helped Lily with her project, listened to the girls' excited chatter about the solar system she was creating, but Ethan could see the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. That evening, after they'd tucked Lily into bed, Grace stood in the hallway staring at Ethan's framed sketch, the one that had first connected their past stories together. "Your drawings helped me survive the worst days," she said softly. "They gave me hope when I had. Nothing else." She touched the glass gently. "And now I'm destroying your life in return." "You're not destroying anything," Ethan insisted. "This is temporary. The sheriff said Thomas is under federal investigation. Once that comes to light, how long will that take?" Grace turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Weeks? Months? And what happens to you and Lily in the meantime?" Ethan stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "We'll manage. I choose to help you, Grace. That choice is mine to make." Grace gave him a sad smile. "You're a good man, Ethan Caldwell. Too good to let yourself be ruined by my problems." She turned away quickly. "I think I'll turn in early tonight. Thank you for everything." Ethan watched her disappear into the guest room, worry gnawing at his chest. He stayed up late that night, working on a new sketch at his kitchen table, trying to capture the moment from a few nights ago when Grace and Lily had sat together on the porch, sharing stories and starlight. Finally, exhaustion drove him to bed. His last thought before sleep was a prayer for guidance, for wisdom to know how to protect both his daughter and the wounded soul who'd sought refuge in their home. He woke suddenly in the pre-dawn darkness, his heart pounding with inexplicable urgency. The house felt different, emptier somehow. Moving quietly past Lily's room, he approached the guest room door. "Grace?" he whispered, knocking softly. When there was no answer, he eased the door open. Pale light from the approaching dawn revealed an empty bed, neatly made. On the pillow lay a single sheet of paper, folded once. The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the guest room as Ethan stood in the doorway, the folded piece of paper trembling in his hands. His heart pounded as he unfolded Grace's note, his eyes scanning the carefully written words. "Dear Ethan and Lily, I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. You've shown me more kindness in these few days than I've known in years, but I won't be the reason you lose your job or your standing in the community. Lily needs her father to be secure and respected. I'm so sorry for bringing trouble to your door. Please know that your kindness has given me strength I didn't know I had. I'll find my way somewhere safe. With deep gratitude, Grace." Ethan's voice cracked as he read the last words. He pressed his palm against the doorframe, steadying himself as the reality of her absence sank in. With shaking fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed Sheriff Daniels. "She's gone," Ethan said when the sheriff answered. "Left sometime in the night. Left a note saying she didn't want to cause any more trouble." "When did you last see her?" Sheriff Daniels' voice was alert despite the early hour. "Around 11 last night. She seemed quiet after I told her about what happened at the church, but I never thought." Ethan's voice trailed off. "I'll alert the patrols in the surrounding counties," the sheriff said. "Given Thomas's threats, we need to find her before he does. Any idea where she might have gone?" Before Ethan could answer, he heard small footsteps running down the hallway. Lily appeared in her yellow pajamas, her face lighting up for a moment before she registered her father's expression. "Where's Grace?" Lily's voice wavered. "Is she making breakfast?" Ethan knelt down to his daughter's level, still holding the phone. "Sweetheart, Grace felt she needed to leave to protect us. No!" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She can't leave. She promised to help me with my art project today." The little girl's face crumpled. Did the mean man make her go away? "Sheriff," Ethan spoke into the phone, holding Lily close with his free arm. "Let me call you right back." He set the phone down and gathered his daughter into a proper hug. Lily's small shoulders shook with sobs. "We have to find her, Daddy. She's scared of him." "I know, baby." Ethan stroked her hair, his mind racing. "I know." He picked up the note again, studying it more carefully. The paper was from the notepad he kept by the kitchen phone. She must have written it there. He hurried to the kitchen, Lily following close behind. The notepad sat slightly askew, and when Ethan held it up to the light, he could see the faint impressions from Grace's pen pressure on the next sheet. Some words were clear enough to read: schedule and what looked like 7:15. "The bus depot," he breathed. The morning bus to the city left at 7:15. It was now 6:40. He turned to Lily, who was clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Sweetie, I need to go find Grace. Mrs. Peterson next door can watch you for a little while. Will you be brave for me?" Lily nodded fiercely, wiping her eyes. "Bring her home, Daddy." Ethan called Mrs. Peterson, who answered despite the early hour. The elderly widow had always been kind to them, especially after Lily's mother passed. Within minutes, she was at their door, in her flowered robe. "Go on," she said, understanding in her eyes. "Lily and I will make cinnamon toast." Ethan grabbed his jacket and truck keys, pausing only to call Sheriff Daniels back. "I think she's headed to the bus depot on Route 43, the 7:15 to the city." "I'll have a car there in 10 minutes, the sheriff promised. "But you're closer." "Go." The old truck's engine roared to life as Ethan backed out of the driveway. The morning was gray now, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. He pressed the accelerator, mentally calculating the fastest route to the depot. Grace's words from her note echoed in his mind. "I won't be the reason you lose your job." The shame in those words twisted in his chest. She blamed herself for Thomas's manipulation, for the church board's prejudice, for all of it. The road stretched before him, empty in the early morning light. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he remembered Grace's face when he'd returned from the church yesterday, how she'd immediately sensed his distress, how her eyes had filled with that terrible mixture of guilt and fear. Raindrops began to speckle his windshield as he turned onto Route 43. The bus depot sat at the edge of town, a plain concrete building with a rusted metal awning. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for 2 cars and what looked like a shadow moving near the entrance. Ethan pulled into the lot just as the rain began to fall in earnest. The depot's fluorescent lights cast a pale glow through the pre-dawn darkness, and his headlights illuminated the empty benches under the awning. His heart pounded as he put the truck in park, praying he wasn't too late. The drum of rain on the metal awning filled the air as he stepped out into the growing storm, each drop a reminder of how close he might be to losing her. Not just to Thomas's threats, but to her own belief that she didn't deserve help, didn't deserve protection, didn't deserve love. Rain pattered against the depot's metal roof as Ethan pushed through, the glass doors, his shoes squeaking on the worn linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow across the nearly empty waiting area. His eyes darted from bench to bench, scanning each shadow and corner. His heart skipped when he spotted her. Grace sat alone on a metal bench near the back, her small purse clutched tightly in her lap. Her shoulders were hunched, making her seem even smaller than usual. She stared straight ahead at a faded bus schedule posted on the wall, though Ethan doubted she was really seeing it. "Grace," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She flinched anyway, turning toward his voice. The bruises on her face had begun to fade to yellowish green, but exhaustion had carved deep shadows beneath her eyes. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Ethan crossed the space between them, his footsteps echoing in the quiet depot. He sat down beside her, leaving careful space between them. "I had to." "Please go home," Grace said, her voice cracking. "Go back to Lily. You've already lost so much because of me. Is that what you think? That you're some kind of burden we need to be protected from?" Ethan leaned forward, trying to catch her downturned gaze. "Grace, look at me." She shook her head, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I heard what happened at the church. Thomas is destroying your life, your reputation, your job, all because you helped me. I can't let that happen." "You're not letting anything happen. These are my choices." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "I choose to help you. I choose to stand up to Thomas and his lies. And you know what? Lily chooses you too." Grace's shoulders shook as she tried to hold back a sob. "She left me a drawing this morning, a little heart with all 3 of our names inside it. I almost couldn't leave after seeing it. Then don't leave. Ethan shifted on the hard bench. When Sarah, my wife, was dying, she made me promise something. She said, don't let fear keep you from doing what's right. I've tried to live by that, to show Lily what it means to stand up for people who need help. But your whole community is turning against you, Grace protested. The church board? They're not the whole community. Sheriff Daniels believes you. Mrs. Peterson from next door, who's watching Lily right now, she believes you too. And you know what? Even if everyone else turned their backs, I'd still be here. Grace finally looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. Why? Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Because I do know you, Ethan said softly. I know the woman who wrote those letters years ago, sharing her pain and hope with a stranger who drew pictures. I know the teacher who makes my daughter's face light up when she talks about science experiments. I know someone who survived years of manipulation and still has the strength to care about protecting others. Fresh tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. I'm so tired of being, quote, afraid, she whispered. Then let us help you be brave. Ethan gestured to her purse and the bus ticket he knew must be inside. You don't have to run anymore. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Grace's hands trembled as she pulled out the ticket. To Minneapolis, she said. I thought I could disappear there, start over where Thomas couldn't find me, and spend your whole life looking over your shoulder? That's not freedom, Grace. That's just a different kind of prison. She stared at the ticket for a long moment, then slowly tore it in half. I don't want to destroy your peace, she said, but her voice held less conviction now. Real peace isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing you're doing what's right, no matter the cost. Ethan smiled gently. And you know what? Since you came to us, I've seen Lily smile more than she has in months. You bring something special to our home, Grace. Something we didn't even know was missing. Grace pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for everything to fall apart. Maybe it will. Maybe things will get harder before they get better. But you don't have to face it alone anymore. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and placed his hand over hers. Come home with me. The depot's fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Grace struggled with her decision. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof, marking the passing seconds. Finally, she squeezed Ethan's hand. Okay, she whispered. Just then, bright headlights swept across the depot's windows, flooding the waiting area with harsh white light. Multiple vehicles pulled into the parking lot, their tires crunching on wet gravel. The depot's glass doors burst open as several agents in dark jackets with FBI emblazoned across their backs filed in, their movements precise and coordinated. Sheriff Daniels followed close behind, his familiar presence a stark contrast to the federal agent's crisp efficiency. Grace's fingers dug into Ethan's arm. What's happening? She whispered, her voice trembling. A tall woman with short dark hair approached them, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Halstead, I'm Agent Mara Tillman with the FBI. Her voice was firm but gentle. We've been investigating your ex-husband's business dealings for some time now. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, his weathered face showing relief. The letter you found, Ethan, the one you turned over to me, it was exactly what the investigation needed. It showed premeditation. Grace's eyes widened. The apology letter? Yes. Agent Tillman nodded, pulling up a chair to sit across from them. That letter demonstrated that Thomas knew exactly what he was planning to do. Combined with the evidence we already had of his financial crimes, it gave us enough to move forward. Ethan felt Grace trembling beside him. He kept his hand steady on her back, providing silent support as she processed the information. Thomas has been arrested, Agent Tillman continued. Our team took him into custody at his office about 20 minutes ago. He's facing multiple federal charges, not just for financial crimes, but for stalking and harassment as well. Grace's breath caught in her throat. He's really been arrested? Yes, ma'am, Sheriff Daniels confirmed. He's not getting out anytime soon. 2 more agents approached, carrying folding chairs. Agent Tillman gestured to them. We'll need to take your statement, Mrs. Halstead. Would you be comfortable doing that now? Mr. Caldwell can stay with you if you'd like. Grace looked at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. The next hour passed in a blur of gentle questioning. Agent Tillman's approach was patient and professional as Grace recounted the events leading up to her escape to Ethan's house. The agent took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but never pushing too hard when Grace struggled with difficult memories. "You've been very brave," Agent Tillman said, pausing to let Grace wipe her eyes. "The documentation you kept of the harassment, the dates you remembered, it all helps build our case." Sheriff Daniels stood nearby, his stance protective. "The whole time Thomas was trying to paint you as unstable, you were actually gathering evidence. That takes real strength, Grace." Ethan watched as Grace straightened slightly at these words, as if a heavy weight was slowly lifting from her shoulders. The terror that had haunted her eyes since that first night at his door was beginning to fade. Agent Tillman closed her notebook and leaned forward. "Mrs. Halstead, I want you to understand something clearly. You are safe now. Thomas is in federal custody and he's facing serious charges. The evidence against him is substantial." Grace's hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different from the tears of fear Ethan had witnessed before. These were tears of relief, of a burden finally being lifted. "Really?" she whispered. "It's really over?" "Yes," Agent Tillman confirmed, her professional demeanor softening with compassion. "It's over. You don't have to run anymore." Grace broke down then, her shoulders shaking with deep, cleansing sobs. Ethan kept his hand on her back, steady and warm, as years of fear and tension poured out of her. The fluorescent lights of the bus depot buzzed overhead, and the rain continued to drum against the roof. But in that moment, those sounds became a backdrop to something miraculous. The sound of chains breaking, of freedom being found. Agent Tillman pulled out a business card and placed it gently on the bench beside Grace. "We'll need to speak with you again, but not tonight. For now, go home and rest. You're safe." Those last two words, "you're safe," seemed to echo in the quiet depot. Grace looked up through her tears, first at Agent Tillman, then at Sheriff Daniels, and finally at Ethan. In their faces, she saw what she had been searching for all along: protection, justice, and unwavering support. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, and through the depot's windows, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. Grace wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and in that breath was the first moment of true peace she had known in years. Morning sunlight painted long shadows across the gravel driveway as Ethan's old truck rumbled up to the farmhouse. The engine's familiar sputter died away, leaving behind a moment of pure silence. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, still trying to process everything that had happened at the bus depot. The screen door banged open, and Lily burst out onto the porch, her braids flying behind her. "Daddy, Miss Grace!" She practically flew down the wooden steps, her face beaming with relief, joy. Grace's eyes welled up with tears as she stepped out of the truck. Lily crashed into her with a fierce hug, wrapping her small arms around Grace's waist. "You came back?" Lily whispered into Grace's sweater. "I was so scared you wouldn't." "I'm sorry I worried you, sweetheart." Grace's voice cracked as she stroked Lily's hair. Ethan watched them from the other side of the truck, his own eyes misty. The sound of tires on gravel made them all look up. Sheriff Daniels' patrol car pulled up, followed by Mrs. Peterson from next door. The elderly woman clutched a covered dish in her hands, her face etched with concern. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Mrs." Peterson said, approaching hesitantly. I brought my apple cobbler, and I need to say something." She turned to Grace, her lined face serious. "I'm ashamed I believed what that man was saying about you. I should have known better than to listen to gossip." Grace's throat tightened. "You couldn't have known, but we should have," Sheriff Daniels interrupted, joining them. "News is spreading fast about Thomas Halstead's arrest. The FBI's evidence goes back years. Financial fraud, abuse of power, everything. And now with the documented abuse." He shook his head. "The whole town owes you an apology, Grace." More cars began arriving throughout the morning. Church board members came, one by one, their faces drawn with remorse. Mr. Psalm Collins, who had led the vote to suspend Ethan, stood awkwardly on the porch with his hat in his hands. "We were wrong," he said simply. "The board is meeting tonight to formally reinstate you, Ethan, if you'll accept." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand why you did what you did. We all make mistakes." Inside the kitchen, the counter gradually filled with casseroles, pies, and fresh bread, the rural community's language of apology and support. Grace found herself surrounded by women who had once whispered behind their hands at the grocery store, now offering tearful hugs and promises of friendship. Sarah Mitchell, who taught third grade, gripped Grace's hands in hers. "We should have seen the signs," she said, her voice thick. "You were always so quiet, so careful. We failed you as colleagues, as neighbors." "The important thing," Grace replied softly, "is that we're here now." Lily moved through the crowd of visitors like a small ambassador, bringing drinks, sharing smiles, and occasionally squeezing Grace's hand as if to make sure she was still there. The little girl's unconditional acceptance seemed to remind the adults of what really mattered. By afternoon, the news had spread further. The local paper called, seeking a statement about Thomas's arrest. Sheriff Daniels handled it professionally, protecting both Grace's privacy and the ongoing investigation. But he made sure one thing was clear: Grace was the victim, not the villain in this story. Mrs. Jenkins from the church quilting circle arrived with tears streaming down her face. "I've known Thomas Halstead since he was a boy," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I knew him, but money and power can poison a soul, can it? I'm so sorry, Grace. So very sorry." Grace found herself comforting others as much as receiving comfort, her natural compassion shining through despite everything she'd endured. She saw Ethan watching her from across the room, his eyes full of quiet pride and something deeper, something neither of them was ready to name yet. As the day wore on, the stream of visitors gradually thinned. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting warm rectangles on the wooden floor. Grace stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes alongside Ethan, while Lily organized the leftover food into containers. "You okay?" Ethan asked quietly, passing her another plate. Grace nodded, then paused. "It's overwhelming, all this support now, but in a good way. Like rain after a long drought." "People want to make things right," he said. "They just need the chance sometimes." As sunset approached, Grace stepped out onto the porch alone. The sky blazed with orange and pink, the clouds edged in gold. She leaned against the railing, feeling the rough wood under her palms, and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Behind her, she could hear Lily's cheerful voice as she helped Ethan put away the last of the dishes, the sound of normalcy, of family, of safety. The screen door creaked, and Mrs. Peterson appeared one last time, touching Grace's arm gently. "We'll do better," the older woman promised. "This community, we take care of our own. And you're one of us now. Dear, you always were. We just forgot that for a while." Grace watched the sun sink lower, painting the farmland in soft shades of amber. The shadows lengthened across the yard, but for the first time in years, they didn't feel threatening. They were just shadows, nothing more. She heard Lily calling from inside about hot chocolate, heard Ethan's warm chuckle in response. The porch steps still held the day's warmth beneath her feet. All around her, the land was settling into evening, peaceful and ordinary and blessed. Grace closed her eyes and felt the last rays of sunlight on her face. The healing would take time, for her, for the community, for everyone touched by Thomas's actions. But here, in this moment, she could feel it beginning. Like the sunset painted across the sky, it was both an ending and a beginning, all at once. The morning air felt crisp and clean as Ethan straightened his tie in the hallway mirror. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the nerves he tried to hide. Grace stood nearby, smoothing invisible wrinkles from his shirt collar with gentle fingers. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "You've already done more than enough." Ethan caught her reflection in the mirror and managed a small smile. "Yes, I do. Not just for the job, but for what's right." Lily bounced down the stairs in her favorite blue dress, her shoes, making hollow thuds against the wooden steps. "You look nice, Daddy," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist. The drive to the church was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that comes before important moments. The parking lot was already full when they arrived, and Grace's breath caught in her throat at the sight of so many familiar faces filing into the building. "We'll wait here," she said, squeezing Ethan's hand before he got out of the truck. Lily scooted closer to her, both of them watching through the windshield as Ethan walked up the worn church steps. Inside, the board members sat in their usual places around the long table, their faces a mixture of discomfort and regret. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting pools of colored light across the worn carpet. Ethan took his place at the podium, his hands resting lightly on its edges. "I've been the handyman here for 8 years," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "In that time, I've fixed countless broken things, loose floorboards, leaky pipes, squeaky doors. But some broken things aren't so easy to see or repair." He paused, looking at each board member in turn. When Thomas Halstead came here spreading lies, you didn't see the broken spirit of the woman he was hunting. You saw what he wanted you to see: scandal, impropriety, risk to the church's reputation. I understand that fear, but fear should never override compassion. Mrs. Henderson, who had been on the board for 20 years, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Peterson, who had initially called for Ethan's suspension, stared down at his clasped hands. "My late wife taught me something important," Ethan continued, his voice softening. "She said that when someone comes to your door in need, you don't just see the need, you see Christ himself asking for shelter. Grace Halstead came to my door bruised and terrified. She needed protection, not judgment. She needed a community to stand with her, not turn away." The room was absolutely still now, every person hanging on his words. Through the windows, he could see his truck where Grace and Lily waited, and it gave him strength to continue. "I know some of you worried about appearances, about what people would think of a single man taking in a woman running from her ex-husband. But sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong to those who don't have all the facts. Sometimes faith means trusting that God sees the whole picture when we only see parts." Pastor Roberts, who had remained neutral during the controversy, nodded slowly. "You showed us what true Christian charity looks like, Ethan. We failed to do the same." Mr. Peterson stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I move to formally reinstate Ethan Caldwell to his position with an official apology from this board for our hasty judgment." Seconded. Mrs. Henderson said immediately, her voice thick with emotion. The vote was unanimous. One by one, the board members came forward to shake Ethan's hand and offer personal apologies. Pastor Roberts put a warm hand on his shoulder. "You've taught us all something important about courage and compassion," the pastor said. "We're blessed to have you here." When Ethan stepped outside, the morning sun had grown stronger, warming the spring air. Church members who had gathered in small groups turned to face him. Unlike the suspicious glances of days past, their faces now showed respect and admiration. Several people approached to shake his hand or pat his back. Mrs. Wilson, who taught Sunday school, hurried up with a basket of fresh baked goods. "For you and your household," she said meaningfully, including Grace in her gesture. "We should have brought these sooner." Grace watched from the truck as person after person approached Ethan. Her eyes grew misty as she saw the community's transformation, from judgment to acceptance, from suspicion to support. Lily squeezed her hand. "See, they know. You're good now," Lily said with a child's simple wisdom. "They know Daddy was right." When Ethan finally made his way back to the truck, his arms were full of casseroles, bread, and baked goods from apologetic church members. His face showed relief and something else. Peace, perhaps, or vindication. As they drove home, Grace was unusually quiet, processing the morning's events. The threat that had haunted her was gone. Thomas was in custody. The community that had once believed his lies now knew the truth. And Ethan had stood up for her again, risking his reputation one final time to make things right. They pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse, the home that had become her sanctuary. Lily helped carry some of the food inside, chattering about which desserts she wanted to try first. In the kitchen, as Grace arranged the gifts on the counter, Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Grace?" she asked, her young face serious. "Are you going to stay for a long time this time?" A gentle autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees as Grace watched Ethan's truck back into her new driveway. The small rental house sat on a quiet street just 10 minutes from the Caldwell farmhouse. Its white paint might have been faded and the front steps could use some repair, but to Grace, it felt like freedom. "Ready for the next load?" Ethan called out, jumping down from the driver's seat. His sleeves were rolled up and a light sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead from the morning's work. Grace nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I can't believe how many boxes I managed to collect in just a week." "That's because everyone kept bringing you things." Lily chimed in from the front porch, where she sat cross-legged, surrounded by bright construction paper. Her fingers worked skillfully, folding another paper flower to add to the growing collection beside her. It was true. Once word had spread about Thomas's arrest and the truth about Grace's situation, the community had rallied around her. Church members brought furniture, kitchen supplies, and linens. Fellow teachers contributed books and decorative items. Even Sheriff Daniels's wife had arrived with a box of carefully wrapped dishes. "Look, Miss Grace." Lily held up a completed yellow paper flower. "This one matches your curtains." Grace walked over and admired the child's handiwork. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you for helping make this place feel like home. Inside, boxes lined the walls of the small living room. Grace had spent the morning organizing them by room, writing neat labels with a black marker. The kitchen boxes were already unpacked thanks to Mrs. Peterson from next door, who had insisted on helping arrange the cabinets just right. Ethan carried in another box marked books and set it carefully in the corner. Your classroom materials, he explained. The school board was keeping them safe. Grace ran her hand over the box, emotion welling up in her throat. Principal Matthews had called personally to offer her a full-time position teaching 3rd grade. We always knew you were an excellent teacher, he'd said, and we're sorry we didn't see what was happening sooner. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as they continued unpacking. Lily's paper flowers gradually appeared throughout the house, on windowsills, taped to walls, arranged in empty mason jars. Their bright colors brought warmth to the spaces that still felt new and uncertain. Dad, can we show Miss Grace the surprise now? Lily bounced on her toes, barely containing her excitement. Ethan checked his watch and nodded. Good timing. It should be ready. They led Grace to the kitchen, where a small box sat on the counter. Inside, she found a framed sketch, one of Ethan's original drawings, the kind that had once given her hope during her darkest days. I thought this spot needed something special, Ethan said quietly, helping her hang it on the wall, beside the kitchen window. The sketch showed a small house with light streaming from its windows, flowers blooming along the path to its door. Grace touched the frame gently. It looks just like this place. I drew it last night, Ethan admitted. Lily helped with the flowers. Later that afternoon, Grace sat in her new living room, surrounded by the evidence of community care. Her therapy appointment card was pinned to the refrigerator. Dr. Sarah Wilson had opened up a spot in her schedule after hearing Grace's story. The church bulletin lay on the coffee table, marking the time for Sunday's service. Mrs. Peterson appeared at the screen door, carrying a plate of cookies. Just wanted to check if you need anything, dear, she called out, and to remind you about the neighborhood potluck next weekend. Grace invited her in, and they chatted while Lily arranged her latest batch of paper flowers in a vase. Ethan worked quietly in the background, fixing the loose handle on the bathroom door, one of many small repairs he'd noticed needed attention. As the day wound down, Grace stood in her doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Ethan loaded the last empty boxes into his truck, while Lily gave one final inspection to her flower arrangements. Are you sure you'll be okay here? Ethan asked, concern touching his features. Grace smiled, feeling stronger than she had in years. I am, thanks to you both. We're just 10 minutes away, Lily reminded her, wrapping her arms around Grace's waist in a tight hug. And Dad said we can visit whenever you want. After they drove away, Grace walked through her new home, touching the walls, adjusting the paper flowers, feeling the reality of this fresh start. On her front step, she noticed an envelope that must have been delivered while they were busy inside. Opening it, she found a handwritten note from her other next-door neighbor, Mrs. Collins. Dear Grace, welcome to Cherry Blossom Street. We're so glad you've chosen our little neighborhood for your new beginning. If you need anything, from a cup of sugar to a friendly chat, my door is always open. Looking forward to getting to know you better. Warmly, Sarah Collins. Grace held the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of welcome. Through her window, she could see Lily's paper flowers catching the last light of day, their colors bright against the growing dusk. The porch light cast a warm glow across Grace's front steps as Ethan's familiar truck pulled into her driveway. The loose board on her porch had been creaking for days, and though she'd insisted it wasn't urgent, Ethan had promised to come by after work to fix it. Grace watched from her window as he gathered his toolbox from the truck bed. The sight of him, still in his work clothes with sawdust clinging to his sleeve, brought a gentle smile to her face. These past few weeks since moving into her rental home had been filled with small moments like this, quiet acts of kindness that made her heart feel fuller with each passing day. Evening, Grace, Ethan called softly as she opened the door. That step's not giving you too much trouble, I hope? Just enough to make me think twice about my morning coffee routine, she replied, stepping aside to let him in. You really didn't have to come by so late. Wouldn't want you twisting an ankle. He set his toolbox down and knelt to examine the loose board. Won't take but a few minutes to secure this properly. Grace leaned against the porch railing, watching as he worked. The evening air was cool, but pleasant, carrying the scent of her newly planted flower boxes. Another gift from Lily, who had insisted on helping her decorate the previous weekend. "How's Lily doing with her science project?" Grace asked, remembering the elaborate solar system model they'd discussed during Sunday dinner. Ethan looked up from his work, a fond expression crossing his face. "She's determined to make every planet's rings and moons absolutely perfect. Asked me 3 times today if we could stop by the craft store for more glitter paint." Grace laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like her. She's so dedicated when she sets her mind to something." "Like someone else I know?" Ethan said quietly, his eyes meeting hers for a moment before returning to his task. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of Ethan's tools against the wood. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the sudden wave of emotion that washed over her. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, her voice gentle in the evening, quiet. "About that night I showed up at your door. About everything that's happened since then." Ethan set his screwdriver down and stood slowly, dusting off his hands. "Feels like a lifetime ago sometimes, doesn't it? And yet I remember every detail so clearly." Grace moved to sit on the porch swing, and after a moment Ethan joined her. "I was so scared that night, so ashamed. I never imagined I'd find." She paused, searching for the right words. "Such kindness, such safety. Grace." Ethan's voice was soft but firm. "You never have to thank me for that. What you've overcome, what you've built for yourself, that's all you." She shook her head, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "But I wouldn't be here without you and Lily. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. You believed me when others didn't. You risked everything to protect me." The porch swing creaked gently as they swayed. In the distance, a whippoorwill called into the gathering dusk. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said after a moment, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "Something I've been wanting to say for a while now." Grace turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster at the serious note in his voice. "These past months, watching you rebuild your life, seeing your strength and kindness, especially with Lily." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've come to care for you, Grace. Deeply. More than I expected to care for anyone again after Sarah passed." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the same gentle steadiness that had given her hope on her darkest days. "I don't want to rush anything," he continued softly. "I know we've both been through so much, but I wanted you to know how I feel, how much you mean to us, to me." Tears spilled onto Grace's cheeks as she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you and Lily. You've become my home. Not this house, not this town, but you two. The way you've helped me remember who I am, who I can be." They sat together in the growing darkness, their joined hands a bridge between their separate journeys that had somehow led them to this moment. The porch light cast soft shadows around them, and, somewhere down the street, a dog barked at a passing car. "We can take this slow," Ethan said softly, his thumb gently brushing across her knuckles. "There's no rush." Grace nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "I'd like that." They stayed on the porch swing for a while longer, talking quietly about small things. Lily's upcoming school play, the community garden Grace had started helping with, Ethan's latest restoration project at the church. The conversation flowed easily between them, comfortable and warm, like a well-worn blanket. As the evening grew later, Ethan reluctantly stood. "I should head home. Lily's probably wondering where I am." Grace walked with him to his truck, their footsteps synchronized on the newly fixed porch steps. At the driver's door, they paused, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Thank you for fixing the step," Grace said softly, meaning so much more than just that simple repair. Ethan's eyes met hers in the dim light. "Any time," he replied, and they both knew he meant it in every possible way. They shared a quiet moment, standing close in the gentle evening air, before Ethan opened his truck door. The moment held all the promise of new beginnings, wrapped in the tender care of hard-won wisdom and healing. The October breeze carried the sweet scent of caramel apples and kettle corn through Henderson Park. Orange and yellow leaves danced across the grass between food stalls decorated with pumpkins and harvest bunting. The annual autumn festival had transformed the normally quiet park into a cheerful gathering of the entire community. "Come on, Daddy, Miss Grace, the ring toss is over there." Lily tugged at both their sleeves, her excitement bubbling over as she pointed toward the game booths. Ethan chuckled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Slow down, sweetheart. The games aren't going anywhere." Grace smiled, adjusting her cream-colored scarf against the crisp air. Just 2 months ago, she wouldn't have dreamed of attending such a public event. But here she was, walking openly among neighbors, who now greeted her with warm smiles instead of suspicious glances. "Mrs. Peterson." Lily waved at her math teacher, who was manning the apple-bobbing station. "Hello, Lily." The elderly teacher beamed, then nodded kindly to Grace. "So good to see you here, Grace. The fourth graders miss having you as their substitute." "Thank you," Grace replied, touched by the genuine warmth in the woman's voice. "I'm enjoying having my own class now." They continued through the festival, stopping at various booths. At the ring toss, Lily's determination showed in her furrowed brow as she aimed carefully. After several attempts, she finally landed a ring around a bottleneck, earning a small stuffed owl. "Look what I won!" "What I won?" She held up her prize triumphantly. "That's wonderful, honey," Grace said, automatically reaching to smooth down Lily's wind-blown hair. The gesture felt so natural that it wasn't until she caught Ethan's gentle gaze that she realized what she'd done. Instead of pulling back, she let her hand rest on Lily's shoulder. These small moments of connection had become precious to her, each one healing another crack in her once-broken spirit. They wandered past craft tables, displaying homemade jellies and hand-knit scarves. The local quilting circle had set up a booth showcasing their latest works, including a beautiful autumn-themed piece that would be raffled off for charity. "Grace," Martha Wilson called out from behind the quilting display, "I saved you some of my pumpkin bread. Don't let me forget to give it to you before you leave." "That's so thoughtful of you, Martha." "Thank you," Grace responded, still amazed at how the community had embraced her. These were the same people who had once whispered behind their hands when Thomas spread his lies. Now they treated her like family. As they approached the food area, delicious aromas filled the air. Ethan bought them each a cup of hot apple cider, and Grace felt a flutter in her heart when his fingers brushed hers as he handed her the steaming cup. "Can I get a caramel apple too?" Lily asked, looking hopefully between them. "After you eat something proper?" Ethan said, gesturing toward the church lady's food booth. "I think I smell Mrs. Johnson's famous chili." They found a spot at one of the picnic tables, and Grace watched as Lily carefully stirred her chili, making sure to get a little bit of everything in each spoonful, just like her father did. "The decorations are beautiful this year," Grace commented, looking at the strings of lights crisscrossing overhead. "They would look even prettier once dusk settled in." The festival committee really outdid themselves. Ethan agreed, then smiled as several children ran past their table, faces painted like autumn leaves. "Can I get my face painted after lunch?" Lily asked between bites. "Of course," Grace answered at the same moment. Ethan said, "Sure thing, kiddo." Their eyes met over Lily's head, and something warm and certain passed between them. This easy synchronicity, the natural way they'd learned to move together as a unit, it felt right. After lunch, they watched as the face-painting volunteer transformed Lily's cheeks into a canvas of fall colors and swirling leaves. While they waited, Ethan's hand found Grace's, their fingers intertwining without discussion or hesitation. More families arrived as the afternoon wore on. Children played tag between the stalls, while parents chatted and grandparents rocked in chairs near the music stage where local bands performed. "There's Emma." Lily spotted her best friend by the balloon artist. "Can I go play?" "Stay where we can see you," Ethan reminded her, and they watched as she raced off to join a growing group of classmates. Grace and Ethan strolled hand in hand, stopping occasionally to chat with neighbors. No one batted an eye at their joined hands or raised eyebrows at their obvious closeness. Instead, they were met with genuine smiles and warm conversation. The afternoon light began to soften, and volunteers started lighting the paper lanterns strung throughout the park. The sight of Lily playing tag with her friends, her laughter carrying across the grass, made Grace's heart swell. She glanced at Ethan and found him already looking at her, his expression tender. Standing there in the gathering dusk, watching Lily's joy and feeling Ethan's steady presence beside her, Grace was struck by a sudden clarity. This wasn't just friendship or healing anymore. This was family. The three of them had somehow woven their lives together so naturally, so completely, that she could no longer imagine her world without them in it. From Ethan's gentle squeeze of her hand, she knew he felt it too. When she turned to meet his gaze, her smile held all the quiet certainty of coming home. Above them, the first lanterns began to glow against the darkening sky, casting a warm, gentle light over the festival grounds. The moment felt perfect, not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was real, solid, and true, just like the love that had grown between them. Golden light spilled through the farmhouse windows as the setting sun painted the kitchen in warm amber hues, transforming the simple room into something almost magical. The old wooden table, worn smooth by decades of family meals and countless conversations, held a feast that looked modest but felt abundant. Perfectly roasted chicken with crispy golden skin, creamy mashed potatoes dotted with butter, and fresh green beans from Ethan's carefully tended garden. Steam rose from the dishes in gentle spirals, carrying the rich, comforting aromas of home cooking through every corner of the cozy room. The kitchen itself seemed to embrace them with its lived-in warmth. Mismatched chairs surrounded the table, each one with its own history and character. Lily's favorite blue-painted chair bore small scratches from years of homework sessions and art projects. Grace's spot had become the chair by the window where she could watch the garden while they ate. Ethan sat at the head, just as his father had done years before, and his father's father before that. Grace sat beside Lily, who was meticulously arranging her green beans into perfectly straight rows before taking even the smallest bite. The child's concentration was absolute, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked. Across the table, Ethan passed the wicker basket of fresh rolls he'd baked that morning, his movements unhurried and peaceful, savoring this simple ritual of sharing a meal. The quiet clink of silverware against plates and their soft conversation filled the space with the kind of gentle domesticity that Grace had once believed was lost to her forever. The dining room chandelier, an old fixture Ethan had restored himself, cast a warm glow over their gathering. Family photographs lined the mantel in the passas, adjoining living room, visible through the open doorway. Pictures of Ethan's late wife, Sarah, smiled down at them, and Grace had long since stopped feeling like an intruder in those captured memories. Instead, she felt included in the continuation of love that this house had always known. "Remember when I first tried to cook in your kitchen?" Grace asked, her voice light with affection as she reached for a roll still warm from the oven. The memory brought a gentle smile to her face. "I was so nervous about burning everything down. I think I checked the smoke detector 3 times before I even turned on the stove." Lily giggled, temporarily abandoning her precise green bean arrangement to look up at Grace with dancing eyes. "You made the best pancakes, though, even if some were a little black on the edges. Daddy said they had character." She made air quotes with her small fingers, mimicking her father's gentle way of finding the positive in everything. "Those were definitely interesting times," Ethan agreed, his eyes crinkling with warmth as they met Grace's across the table. The look they shared held months of shared memories. The tentative first steps, the gradual building of trust, the slow bloom of something beautiful and unexpected. "But look at us now. You've made this kitchen your own." Grace felt a familiar surge of gratitude wash over her like a gentle tide. The memories of those early days, the bone-deep fear that made her hands shake while cracking eggs, the uncertainty that had her second-guessing every decision, the shame that followed her like a shadow had slowly transformed into something entirely different, something healing and whole and hopeful. She looked around the kitchen that had become her sanctuary, noting the small changes she'd made. The herb garden on the windowsill, the cheerful yellow curtains she'd sewn, the cookie jar she'd filled with Lily's favorites. "I never thought I'd feel this kind of peace again," she said, softly, her voice carrying the weight of honest emotion. "Both of you. You gave me back so much more than just safety. You gave me a home, a purpose, a future I actually want to wake up to." Lily reached over with the unconscious affection she'd developed over their months together and squeezed Grace's hand. Her small fingers were warm and slightly sticky from dinner, but Grace wouldn't have pulled away for anything. "That's what family does," Lily said, with the simple, profound wisdom that children possess. "Daddy always says we have to help people who need it, like Mommy used to do when she was here." Ethan's expression softened at his daughter's words, pride and love and a touch of old grief mingling in his gentle eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you, sweetheart. You've got her heart, that big, generous heart that always saw the best in everyone." Grace felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were the gentle kind. Tears that came from being deeply moved, rather than heartbroken. These were tears of gratitude, of belonging, of finally understanding what it meant to be truly loved. "These past few months have taught me so much about courage," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Not just about being brave in those scary moments when everything feels like it's falling apart, but about the everyday courage it takes to trust again, to open your heart, to believe in good people when the world has shown you so much darkness. Sometimes the bravest thing is just showing up, Ethan replied, his voice carrying the quiet strength that had first drawn Grace to him during her darkest hour. Taking one day at a time, choosing to keep going even when you can't see the path ahead. He paused, looking around the table at the two people who had become his world in ways he'd never expected. And sometimes, life surprises you with new beginnings when you least expect them. When you think your story is over, it turns out to be just the end of one chapter. Lily perked up at the mention of new beginnings, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth as her face lit up with sudden excitement. Speaking of new beginnings, Miss Grace, will you come to dinner again next Sunday? We could make apple pie like last time, the one with the lattice top that you taught me how to do. The hopeful excitement in Lily's voice made Grace's heart swell until she thought it might burst from sheer joy. She glanced at Ethan, seeing her own happiness reflected in his steady, loving gaze. The silent communication that had developed between them over these months spoke volumes. No words needed to convey what they both felt. I would love that, Lily. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. This is home now. They finished their meal with comfortable conversation that flowed like a gentle stream. Lily shared animated stories from school about her science project on butterflies and the new girl in her class who needed a friend. Ethan talked about his latest restoration project at the church, a beautiful old altar that was slowly revealing its original grandeur under layers of time and neglect. Grace described the art program she was helping to start for her students, her eyes bright with the passion that had returned to her voice when she spoke about teaching. The evening settled around them like a familiar, well-worn quilt, comfortable and safe and exactly right. The kitchen had grown dim as the sun fully set, but the warm light from the chandelier created an intimate cocoon that held them close. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. After dinner, while Lily carefully cleared her homework supplies from one end of the kitchen table, her math worksheets and colored pencils organizing themselves into neat piles, Ethan and Grace stepped out onto the wide front porch. The wooden boards creaked softly under their feet, a sound that had become as comforting as a lullaby. The air was crisp with the promise of early autumn, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves that crunched underfoot and the distant wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Apple trees in the yard stood heavy with fruit, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. They stood close together at the porch railing, their shoulders touching lightly as they looked out over the darkening yard that had become their shared sanctuary. "Thank you for dinner," Grace said softly, though the words seemed insufficient for everything she was feeling. "For everything, really. For taking me in when I had nowhere else to go. For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Ethan turned to face her, his expression gentle and full of understanding in the soft glow of the porch light. The fixture cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the kindness that lived in his eyes. "You don't have to thank us, Grace. Having you here, it feels right. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place." After being scattered for so long, she nodded, understanding exactly what he meant with the deep recognition that comes from shared experience. The broken pieces of her life had slowly mended in ways she never expected, creating something new and beautiful and stronger than what had come before. Like a mosaic made from shattered glass, the fractured parts had been rebuilt into something more stunning than the original. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "the kind that feels steady and real and lasting. The kind that doesn't make you hold your breath, waiting for it to be taken away." "Sometimes the best things in life come after the storms," Ethan replied, reaching for her hand with the natural ease that had developed between them. His touch was warm and familiar now, grounding and safe and full of promises for tomorrow. When the ground is cleared and fertile, that's when new things can grow. The screen door creaked open behind them with its familiar protest, and Lily bounded out onto the porch, her homework apparently finished for the evening. "Can we look at the stars?" she asked eagerly, her face tilted upward toward the sky. "It's so clear tonight. I bet we can see the Big Dipper and everything." They moved together to the edge of the porch, Lily positioning herself between them like the bridge she'd become. All three faces turned upward to the vast expanse of glittering stars. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, a canvas of deep purple and midnight blue dotted with countless points of light. The Milky Way was visible as a faint ribbon across the heavens, and the moon hung like a silver crescent among the stellar display. The night was quiet except for the distant chorus of crickets in the grass and the soft rustle of leaves in the apple trees. A barn owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its haunting note adding to the peaceful symphony of evening sounds. Grace felt Lily's small hand slip into hers on one side, her fingers warm and trusting, while Ethan's larger hand remained steady and reassuring on the other. Standing there together under the infinite canopy of stars, Grace felt the full weight of how far they'd all traveled. From that desperate night months ago when she'd arrived on their doorstep, broken and afraid, to this peaceful moment filled with love and belonging, they had weathered storms and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Not just surviving, but truly living. Not just getting by, but building something beautiful and lasting and true. The night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, 3 hearts beating in peaceful rhythm, 3 lives woven together by courage, kindness, and the kind of unwavering love that transforms everything it touches. In the quiet darkness, surrounded by the soft sounds of home and safety, they stood as a family, not bound by blood or law, but by something equally powerful and far more chosen. Decision to stand together, to protect each other, to build a future filled with light and hope and endless possibilities. Above them, the stars bore witness to their quiet joy, twinkling like celestial blessings on the family they had chosen to become. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Caldwell, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.